Hello, all, and welcome back to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. Today, we're taking another dip into Breath of the Wild, specifically aiming to beat the game without the use of weapons, at least the conventional ones. And my goal has always been that this series features documentation of sorts of what I believe is possible and not possible, as well as a little bit of commentary on exactly what Zelda is, what it has come from, what it means to me as a player, as an individual. And that to me has always been something that has been reasonably nuanced, because it's always been something that I've enjoyed for the sake of enjoying it. I started playing The Legend of Zelda in some capacity back in Ocarina of Time, admittedly the GameCube version combined with Master Quest, but regardless of that fact, it was still a game that I greatly enjoyed and wanted to play. It was a sense of escapism. It was a game that took me to another world. A world where knights and dragons could fight alongside or against one another just because. Where magic and mystery was around every corner. Zelda's always had this penchant, this habit of not fully explaining what all is going on within the lore of the world. This, of course, has always left a little bit of room for interpretation. And while most of these interpretations have become pretty solid by the community, I always find that there's just a little bit of room for, but what if? And I always love that about Zelda as a whole. But today, more than anything, I want to take a look at three individuals that show up time and time again. These are the titular Triforce crew, if you will. Link, Zelda, and Ganon or Ganondorf, depending on which version you prescribe to. Subscribe to? That's the word. So, yeah. Starting with the easy one. I suppose we need to start back at Skyward Sword. Now, back in, I believe it was 2012-ish, don't quote me on the timeline here, it was around the 25th anniversary of Zelda as a whole that we ended up getting Skyward Sword. And it was intended as a story showcasing the creation of the true Master Sword, as well as the rivalry between the three main individuals of the Zelda franchise as a whole: Ganondorf, Zelda, and Link. Now, skimming over some plot threads here for a moment, Zelda is, of course, the blood of the goddess. In the prologue to Skyward Sword, it is mentioned that Hylia fought against an individual named Demise. Hylia, being a goddess who was tasked with the protection of the creations of Din, Nairu, and Furore, all kind of ended up with the version of Hylia fighting for eons. Upon sealing Demise away within the sealed grounds or whatnot within Skyward Sword's Faerun region, she was left with a problem. She needed to have a means of defeating Demise indefinitely without her being around, as she was very badly wounded. So she hatched two plans. The first was the creation of the Goddess Sword. The Goddess Sword was a weapon of divine intent, with a servant held within. This individual was Fi, and she needed to create an individual capable of being able to fight back against the demonic hordes and the forces of evil within the realm of Zelda as a whole. And so, she created a divine soul. This was a soul that could never be broken, a spirit that was effectively meant to be perfect in terms of its resolve, and capabilities. This, of course, became the spirit of Link. Lastly, she needed a motivation, and she ended up stripping herself of her immortal form, creating Zelda. Zelda is the blood of the goddess, if you will. The goddess reincarnated as a human. And all honesty, I think this is a great way of going about it. The holder of the Triforce of Wisdom, one of the protectors of all of Hyrule, being the reincarnation of one of the protectors of Hyrule, makes too much sense. But we also created Link in that. So where does the third show up? During the final battle, or just after it with Demise, we get a piece of information. Demise forms a curse that my hatred never perishes. It is born anew in a cycle with no end. And know that those like you, those who share the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero, they are eternally bound to this curse, and your descendants will wander a blood-soaked sea of darkness for all eternity. At this point, Demise kind of fades into obscurity, disappears, whatnot, and he never really shows up again after having been sealed at the end of Skyward Sword. And for some, it's a pretty clear reason why. He's gone. He's within the Master Sword, being sealed away, his residual consciousness slowly but surely ebbing into nothingness. Perfect, right? Good guys win. There's that whole blood of the goddess, spirit of the hero thing. We should probably deal with that, right? We already have the blood of the goddess sorted. But let's talk about the hatred of Demise. The hatred of Demise is most commonly reincarnated as some form of Ganondorf. Ganondorf appears originally in Ocarina of Time as per timeline statements, okay? And this version of Ganondorf shows up in both Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, and is sealed in the Sacred Realm for some time. Depending on which version of which timeline you follow, the child's timeline, specifically after Twilight Princess, leads to Ganon's eventual resurrection and rise to power once again, while Botw is wreaking havoc. Now, I believe there is only one true incarnation of Demise's hatred, this being Ganon and/or Ganondorf. But in the absence of Ganon, we also get individuals like Onox, Varen, Botw, we get Bellum, we get Malladus, we get numerous individuals that show up as villainous intent characters. And to me, that showcases that there's always something more to it. I don't necessarily believe that all of the named villains out there are tied to Demise's curse, only that they are tied to the resurrection of Demise once again. So we got a bit of a problem there, don't we? Lastly, we have the spirit of the hero. Link is typically personified by simply being an entity of courage. But what I like about Link as a character, as the hero of the franchise, basically ties into the fact that Link is more or less just a vessel for the player. You yourself as an individual get to take the control of Link and be the character. You get to guide him along adventures across all of Hyrule, because why not? And being very honest about this fact, I love that Link has so many ways of existing within the overall franchise of Zelda. But backing up just a tad here, which incarnation of Link is the best? Well, that really depends on your perspective. I myself am very fond of the Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and the Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom variants. I find that the Skyward Sword variant, the Goddess's Chosen Hero, is the one that I resonate with, as of course you would go the extra mile to save your loved one. Of course you would do anything and everything to protect the people you care for. And when Demise/Girahim all get involved and try to make the world a less safe place for Zelda or whomever, yeah, of course he's gonna get angry. Of course he's gonna lash out. Because you just threatened his best friend, his life, his people. Of course Link is gonna get angry. But if you look at the other versions, you have the Twilight Princess Zelda, or Link. This is by far and away my favorite characterization of Link. And it's because of the opening that a lot of people tend to dislike about Twilight Princess that makes this character so compelling. In the beginning, you end up forging a relationship with a bunch of children. Malon, Talon, I think, or Mallow, Tallow, what the point being, a bunch of the kids around all of Ordon Village. And these kids are all very much a part of Link's identity in this village. He is the big brother of the entire community. And it makes Link feel more human because, yeah, he's going out of his way to buy a slingshot to show off to the kids and spend some time with the people around him. He has a special individual in the form of Ilia, or Ilia. I can never read that double L thing properly. But he also has a close relationship with the swordsman in the village. He has a relationship with the village elder. He has a part-time job raising and handling cattle. He is a very identifiably good individual. He's somebody who is community-oriented. And when everything goes haywire prior to the first dungeon, you have an investment in those characters, not just as yourself, but as Link. And I think that makes this Link one of the more identifiably good ones, because he spends the first third of the game trying to track down all of those kids that went missing. And after finding each of those individuals, getting Ilia and the kids back to Ordon Village, or not Ordon, Kakariko. Yeah, okay, they're safe. Everybody's good, right? But Ilia lost her memory. So you're spending a lot of time trying to track down and find ways to bring back her memory, and you find different ways of building these connections. It always made Twilight Princess specifically feel so much bigger than a lot of games out there ever attempted to. And, of course, as you get to the later parts of the game, you become more invested in Midna, the side character, if you will. But Midna was an individual that always left a level of, yeah, okay, there's more to this world than meets the eye. I need to figure this out. I need to help her. I need to do something. And that always made me absolutely overjoyed with the design philosophy of Twilight Princess, because they did so much with these characters and got you invested in Hyrule in a way that very few Zeldas ever did. And so, for me, Twilight Princess is the best. Just bar none. Secondly, and lastly, we have the new hero, the hero of the wild. The Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom hero is one of the weirder ones within the franchise. He doesn't have the endless grab bag of tools like the older Zelda and Link, or older Link did. Instead, having most of his more main tools rely on a Sheikah Slate, a tool that was gifted to him at the beginning of the game. Cool. I like that. I can get behind that. What else does he got? An endless grab bag of miscellaneous swords, bows, shields, and bits and pieces from all of the monsters he has slain. Perfect. What else? Not much. And Tears of the Kingdom actually takes this a step further by giving Link's abilities to Roru's arm that he has artificially had spliced onto him as his arm was destroyed in the initial battle against Ganon. This individual is going through and saving Hyrule again, because who else will? Zelda's missing again, and we're not really sure if or when she will ever come back. It always made sense to me that this version of Link had more to offer than I think a lot of others do. Anywho, the other thing I wanted to mention was that as a kid, it was the Wind Waker Link that always resonated with me. Because he was interested in saving his sibling. He had more going for him in terms of the emotional investment, but was notably distanced from the original hero, the Ocarina of Time, Link. So, yeah. But every Link ends up tying their roots, their goals, their spirit back to the hero or the goddess's chosen hero. Which I think is a interesting tie-in, that it has to be the goddess's chosen hero and not just any old version of Link that we end up with. Anywho, as I'm sure you've noticed, we've spent the last 5-ish minutes in a singular shrine, trying to get this thing to work. And this is a shrine that I think is possible. Just incredibly hard. So, the goal of this shrine is effectively to get the 2 orbs into the pedestals behind you. The aim is ordinarily just to get a bow, shoot a couple arrows, and you're done. The problem is that while the first one is reachable by basic throws, the second one is not. Or the second pedestal is not. So you need to find a way to get to the second pedestal, or at least close enough to do damage, and knock the Sheikah orb further back. Great. Let's do that. How do you do that? That's really the question that is begged by this circumstance. And as you'll see, I'm close, but I can just not quite make the cut when it comes to dealing damage to the mini guardians or the orb itself. Now, I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure the blast radius on the Bombs Plus is larger. And if the Bombs Plus have a larger blast radius, then that effectively means that this is possible with the Bombs Plus. Problem that we're going to run into with that is that we, at this moment in time, based on what I've experienced, cannot get the camera. No camera means we cannot get the upgraded runes. No upgraded runes means, of course, no Bombs Plus. So we end up in a situation where no matter what we do, we're kind of hooplawed. That's not exactly the greatest situation to be in. So what do we fix? How do we fix this? Theoretically, if I can get the camera room, the rest should be easy. Theoretically. But This is all dependent on whether or not I can get the Akala and Hateno, whatchamacallit, the Blue Flame quest completed. If I can, great, no big deal, we're all good. If I can't, well, then I got a lot more work ahead of me. So, that's more or less where I want to leave that problem. As a result of that, while you are seeing me absolutely throw my head against the wall here, I do not believe this one is currently possible. I know it's theoretically possible, but there's a little more work that needs to go into making this one work. So for now, we're going to leave it as, shucks, and move on. Instead, heading to what I like to lovingly consider the sages of the desert. Now, the desert sages are actually an individual group that I personally think are well put together, well thought out. So, in the Ocarina of Time, we have the Desert Colossus. The Desert Colossus is is the Spirit Temple for one, but I believe it is actually depicting Twinrova. Now, Twinrova being an individual character that shows up, a 400-year-old individual who falls into the purview of being a individual within Zelda's lore as long-lasting and near-endless power. I feel like Twinrova is the Desert Colossus in Ocarina of Time. You can see it as an individual that shows up in Breath of the Wild on the northern end of the Gerudo Highlands. But we have 7 more that show up in, this ring on the west end of the Gerudo Desert. These 7 monuments are ancient in nature, carved from the stone around them as being incredibly monumental statuettes. And if I'm being honest, I love this particular grouping, because these statues are meant to showcase more about the history and lore of Hyrule than a lot of other groups actually do. But what do I mean by that? Each of the 7 sages that are showcased in most of the Zelda lore, they show up originally in Link to the Past as being 7 individuals that need to be saved in order to seal or defeat Ganon. That was kind of the first initial statement we got. And we get more of these types of statements over the course of Zelda as a whole. They show up in Ocarina of Time as 7 sages. They show up in A Link Between Worlds as 7 sages. They show up in Four Swords Adventures as the 7 maidens. You end up seeing them countless times, counted times over the course of the franchise. And this is kind of an important detail. A, because of the obsession with the number 7, but also because they each take on different incarnations. Whereas one group will have a witch as one of the sages, the next will have a miner or a clergyman. One has Darunia, a Goron, as one of the sages, and yet the next group doesn't. They're a group that is in constant fluctuation with what is expected. And even the sages show up again in Tears of the Kingdom as the Sage of Water, Thunder, Wind, and Fire. Now this is interesting because the Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, end up with kind of these 4 more basic sages compared to Ocarina of Time, which had the Sage of Forest, the Sage of Fire, Water, Shadow, Spirit, Light, and then the leader of them all, who was the princess. This is good. I like that aspect too. You also have the Sage of Earth and Wind show up in Wind Waker. And maybe there was originally supposed to be more. I'm not necessarily sure. I've heard a little bit of hearsay about rushed development. But that's the thing, is that Wind Waker and its affiliated storyline also has sages. And so you end up with the situation where the sages are a constant, but never a definitive. Twilight Princess has the 7 sages show up, and it's one of the few times where you actually see one of the sages be destroyed or defeated, in that they existed prior to the execution of Ganondorf, and yet they existed prior and after the execution of Ganondorf, but one of them perished during said execution due to Ganondorf's affiliation with the Triforce. Anywho, that's all I really have for that. This particular shrine is an easy one. One that, as long as you understand what you're aiming for, makes sense. Each of the colossi, if you will, the 7 sages, have a symbol engraved somewhere on them. One's on the foot, one's on the hand, one's on the head, one the chest, one's on the sword, so on and so forth. As you get this information, you can use it to slowly but surely fill in the pedestals on the ground. Fill all the pedestals, and you get a shrine. That's more or less all it is. What I like about this is that, as a guess and check format, you could, theoretically, do every single shrine one after another, just because. And that's okay. Alright, so the one on the forehead is the 2 dots. So I gotta figure out which one's the 2 dots, and whether that's here. I have the 2 dots there, perfect. So, we're gonna take this one, put it with that colossi, or sage. We have, I think that would be like a Tomoe. Either way, we have this symbol that we're going to take over to the far end over there. And as I go about it, I'm always replacing the prior symbols with the new ones. Effectively, slowly but surely, it's like a sorting algorithm. Each one I move to the next location is going to have a bit more information complete and accurate. But it's a very, very inefficient sorting algorithm. Anywho, we're going to take this back and continue adjusting as need be. Oh, apparently that's the last one. So, I'll be honest, the Gerudo Desert is an area that is absolutely massive, and I wasn't really fully aware of just how massive it actually ends up being. As a result, it's probably going to be another 2 weeks in the desert, with more side quests and whatnot as we go along. If you like what you see, like what you hear, or are simply curious how much of Zelda Breath of the Wild is beatable with minimal gear, I would love if you left a like, a comment, and potentially even a subscribe. If not, no harm done. But that's all for now. Until next week, I hope you all have a good one.